I'll tell you two stories, maybe three stories. I remember Chris. He had once in class asked if Carlos Castaneda, he's written like 20 books or so about his experience with Don Juan, if his books were basically the outcome of his imagination. He just sat somewhere, and it was the 1960s. There was this movement taking place in the American culture and the American psyche. And some people argue that because he was so imaginative and he was an anthropologist and he had a spiritual bent, kind of like the woman who goes somewhere and writes 20 volumes of Harry Potter. Castaneda did the same thing. And so Chris asked if it's valuable for us to read his writing because it may all be fiction. When you consider what life does to us, you go to school and you have this fantasy in your head that once you get your bachelor's, your master's, your PhD, something great is waiting for you. And then you get your diploma, and all of a sudden something about it just fizzles out. That your fantasy gets crushed by the reality that yes, you have a PhD, yes, you have some power, yes, you made some sacrifices, but now you're very poor in the sense that you now have to apply for a job. There's an excitement in that, and I suppose there is some excitement in going to interviews and hopefully getting a job, and there's a good amount of excitement in getting an offer. And very much like being given a diploma, there comes a point where you dread going to work. And ultimately, everything turns out to be like what the Buddha said some 3,000 years ago. There is an excitement with every birth of anything. It's like this brand new life that just breathes life into a life that's gone nowhere. And then something happens to this life. It slowly begins to suffocate. And I don't know why, maybe it's just part of the human experience, the human psyche. You just get bored of things. And there comes a point where the very thing that gave you so much life now suffocates you. It's dead to you. You don't want to be around it, you don't want to have it in your life. But it's there. There isn't much you can do. And that's really what all of life is. Things are born, there's excitement, you get tired of them, they sicken you. And then you pray that this thing is just removed from your exterior life as well as all the memories you have of it. It no longer serves any purpose, it's like dead. And all of a sudden comes Harry Potter. All of a sudden comes Castaneda. I don't really care if he ever met a Don Juan. I don't care if Don Juan was a true character. I don't care if Don Juan was a magician. I don't care if Don Juan knew everything there is to know about peyote. All I know is that I come home and it's dreadful because of what life does to me on a daily basis. It sucks the life out of me. And on my drive home, I look forward to going to my study, grabbing one of his books, sitting down with a nice cup of coffee and just reading it. And it takes me to places that ordinary life can't take me. Am I worshipping the wrong thing? Am I in love with someone's imagination? Someone who just made up something from thin air? It may be all true, but I don't really care. Regardless of what a charlatan, perhaps, Don Juan, or Carlos Castaneda, or Gurdjieff may be, all these four characters, the truth is they do something to my psyche. Maybe it's because of history that has been advertised to me that Gurdjieff was a real teacher, Bhai Sahib was a real teacher. Maybe it's the power of advertisement. But regardless, I look at the book In Search of the Miraculous, or Daughter of Fire, or the teachings of Don Juan, or the dialogues of Plato, or the Bible, or the Quran, or Dhammapada, whatever the case may be. And I impose a fantasy into these things, a fantasy that makes me believe in something, some magical realm. I think it's valuable. It doesn't really matter if you're worshipping the real thing or you're worshipping figments of your own imaginations, your own creation. The end result is you're worshipping. And the thing with all kinds of worship is, whether you worship God or you worship a man or a woman or you worship a child because you're the mother, all kinds of worship remove your pride to some extent. All kinds of worship create a good amount of humility. All kinds of worship make you passive. They demand that you make sacrifices, and you do so willingly. I usually don't share these things, but I remember many decades ago, one night I got home and I'm just in a really bad shape. And I turn off the lights, I get into a fetal position, and I kind of just break down a little bit. Out of exhaustion, I fall asleep. And I have a dream. And it was a beautiful dream. And I didn't much care about what Krishnamurti would say about dreams and those things, that, Muslims dream about Muhammad and Christians dream about Jesus and Hindus dream about Krishna. Krishnamurti had no power at that point in my life. And I awoke from the dream. It's like I had been resurrected from the dead. I was filled with life. I was happy. I felt as if I was connected to something. And time passes, and the intensity of the experience fades. And then I say to myself, maybe tonight when I go home, I should get myself into a fetal position again and coerce, manipulate, play with my own psyche so I could break down and then fall asleep on the floor, and maybe I'll have the dream again, or maybe something more or less intense. And it didn't work. But I think my intentions, despite being manipulative, my intentions were really good. Without really knowing what I was saying to myself, perhaps, or to the universe, was that life has nothing to offer me. The world is a huge place, and it's a huge toy store. But I lock myself in my room because nothing out there excites or interests me. And I am willing to play all sorts of ridiculous games on my psyche for an experience that this world can't give me. Was I worshipping it? Absolutely. Had it come to me, would I awake from it and say it was the creation of my own imagination or mind? Maybe Krishnamurti would, come in from some corner of my psyche and say, Amir, you played the trick on yourself and it worked. But the truth is, whether it was my own creation or whether it was given to me as a blessing of sorts, if you believe in those things, these experiences do give me wings. And they get me in touch with something that just everyday, ordinary life can't give me. Really early in my life, I ran into this young woman and I fell in love with her. And she fell in love with me. And it's the young woman who had MS. I didn't care about the disease, and I didn't care because I didn't really know much about it. And the other aspect of not caring was that, love is an amazing emotion. It really blinds you. You are so much into the present that the devastation that's waiting to impose itself upon you in the future, you don't think about it. You have this ridiculous and stupid courage that you say, the way I feel about this person is so wonderful that I can conquer anything. So what had happened was that a few times I went to the car wash rather late, because I had to drive from San Francisco to Roseville. After a while, my parents just knew that something was up, and eventually I told them that yes, I met this person, and they were very happy for me. On one occasion, my mom was just relentless. She wanted to know why I was late all the time. And then I didn't know what else to say except to say we had gone to the hospital. She had to be examined for this particular disease. My mom didn't know what this disease was either. So she calls her nephew's wife, Stephanie. She says, "What is MS, Stephanie?" And they're on the phone for the next hour and a half. And my mom is like in the kitchen crying. I say, "Mom, what's going on?" Now see, I'm in love. I am worshipping this woman, I'm worshipping this emotion. I'm worshipping the future I will have with this woman. I'm just in a state of worship. And I don't care if I have to sacrifice Ishmael or Isaac. I've been waiting for God to show his face, and finally he does. And he's asking me a very, very tiny thing. Sacrifice your son, not a problem. Sacrifice, your future for this emotion, this love, this narrative that you've created. It's not a problem. When my mom calmed down a little bit, she looks at me, and all of a sudden she screams, "You can't do this. I'm not going to let you do this." "Mom, I'm a grown man. You can't tell me what to do. There's nothing grown up about you," she says to me. And you know how you jackhammer a cement? You don't really see the cracks initially, but as the jackhammer keeps hammering away, little by little, you see the cracks. And then this piece of concrete shatters into pieces. Every single day, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 times she would call, and I was at the car wash. She would scream, she would yell, she would cry. And when you're not a parent, you don't really understand these things. It always reminds me of Baba Tahir's poem, "گلی که خم بدادم پیچ تابش ز آب دیدگونم دادم آبش به درگاه الهی کی روابی گل از ما دیگری گیره گلابش." That this is a kid I raised with the blood of my heart and the tears of my eyes. That's how I protected this kid. And that's how all parents do. They really raise and protect their kids with their time, with all the things they have to sacrifice, put their life on pause. And once you put your life on pause, eventually you just forget, all the things you wanted to be, all the things you wanted to do. Ask any parent. And there comes this breaking point where they just give up on their hopes because life is just demanding. You wanted to be a Socrates, but that's out the window. You wanted to be a philosopher, you wanted to do this, you want to do that. Nothing works anymore. And what she was basically telling me, my mom, is that I'm not going to give you freely to this disease. You came out of me, and I will do whatever I can to make sure that your relationship gets messed up, so you could come back home and you could perhaps find yourself a different companion or no companion at all. Her relentless jackhammering of my psyche, after a while, cracks began to appear. And now I had two things to worship. I love my parents, I love this woman, and the conflict began to grow. And they grew more and more and more and more until every morning I would wake up angry, not knowing which direction to go. My mom would say, "Well, if you want to get married, you will no longer be my son." That young woman would say, "If you get married, you can never see your parents." You see. And so all of a sudden what happens is you realize that whatever emotion you had towards this woman, whatever emotions you had towards your parents, and whatever emotions and perspectives you had about your own self, they're all getting destroyed. And they're getting destroyed by the realities of life. As long as those realities don't hit your imagination, you'll be fine. You'll be in a continuous state of worship. You will continue to love. But the moment life happens, little by little, however intense you may have felt, it's just going to go away, you know. It's something David and I used to talk about. We used to go to coffee shops and sometimes, you know, this Persian place to eat some food, and we stay there for like 5-6 hours. David worked with some really, really interesting people, and I'm sure he fell in love with one or two of them. I had fallen in love with Hussein, and I think your first real teacher eventually, I mean, you may work with other teachers and eventually you will go back to the very first person you worked with, who kind of just opened your eyes a little. You know, it's kind of like reading Daughter of Fire, that once in a while life hands you this beautiful book and you're ready for the book, and the book gives you wings, and then you realize you're getting to the end of the book, so instead of reading 10 pages a day, you read 2 pages a day, because you don't want the book to end, because once the book ends, the fantasies will go away. You will not know what to do with your days, you know, once the book ends. And the book ends, you finish the book. And you want to reread the book only to realize you know exactly how it's going to unfold and it's no longer that interesting. And you go to the library or you go to some bookstore and you comb through the aisles and you comb through the books because you want something similar, but you can't find anything. And you sit back and you say, how could it be? I have all these books in my house. Once in a while, I wake up early in the morning and I just go through the books. I just want to find something that'll give me wings. And you realize this is just ink and paper. There are no books. You know, nothing can come close to Daughter of Fire. I mean, sure, they can have a paragraph or two here and there, but nothing glues you to your seat the way the dialogues did, the way Dasbag Zarathustra did, the way Daughter of Fire did. And you realize that, well, you know, you'd rather just get rid of all these books because they serve no purpose. What happens is that your imagination never comes to life. There is nothing to worship. There is nothing to love. Everything is ordinary. Everything is just really just fluff. I don't know what you mean by obstacle. If by obstacle you mean something that clips the wings of your ability to worship, and little by little you kind of descend and you begin to walk instead of to fly. Once you've been contaminated, you know, it's finished. You know, early on in my relationship with Hussein, because of the way I felt about him, because of the way I saw him, people would tell me things about him. That the reason why he came to the US was because of ABCD. The way he got his visa to come to the US was EFGH. But my feelings towards Hussein was so intense that it didn't matter what people said. It didn't impact me. It didn't impact my image of him, my feeling towards him. So I continued to ascend. I continued to worship him. What became an obstacle was Krishnamurti. I began to read Krishnamurti. He has a lot of nice things to say, but you have to read Krishnamurti at the right time in your intellectual maturity. Because if you read Krishnamurti at the wrong time, it's like telling your father to let go of the bike. And you're only 2, and it's your first time. And Krishnamurti can really do some serious damage. So what happened was that when I would go to his house and I would sit and listen, in the back of my head, Krishnamurti was playing. He was whispering into my ears. And then Gurdjieff. And what would happen is I would compare Krishnamurti to Hussein, or Hussein to Krishnamurti, or Hussein to Gurdjieff, or Hussein to Rumi. And I would walk away feeling that Hussein would always fall short. He missed this particular point, and he missed that particular point. Now when you're young, and when you're a novice, and when you're curious, in all the wrong ways, and at all the wrong times, you don't really see the damage and you don't really understand the consequences. There came a point where you realize that you go to a saint house, but you can't feel anything. There is nothing to worship. He doesn't, and you feel as if he doesn't know what he's talking about. And this, really, I suppose, long rant really is, if there is anything you worship, there's always pros and cons to these things, but continue to worship it. Because once it goes away, it's going to be such a difficult thing for you, for any one of us, to find something that we can worship again. And as you get older and as you gain more experience, and as life injects more contaminants inside you, it becomes more and more and more difficult. You know, it's like your first marriage, you walk in with a lot of hope, and then it gets crushed. Your second marriage, you still have hope, but it's not as strong. Your third marriage, fourth marriage, fifth marriage, you're just waiting for the disaster to happen, you know. You're just, whatever you touch is like a ticking bomb. You know, one of the nice things about love, you really don't see the other person as flesh, as just a human being, as just a piece of meat. I mean, it's such a transformative experience, love is, and what it does to you. I mean, look, when you fall in love with something or someone, just the fantasy of being close to them, to their physical body, just the fantasy of holding their hand, the fantasy of kissing them, the fantasy of being intimate with them, they're all acts of worship. And what you're seeking really is union. And when the union isn't there, there is separation. And when there is separation, there is longing. And longing is like always in a state of prayer. And, you know, the world advertises itself to you, but it pales against the thing that you worship and you want closeness and intimacy with. And then tragedy happens. You know, you are close and you hold hands and you kiss and you are intimate, and then you're close more and you kiss more and you're intimate more, and you come upon the truth of the Buddha, that whenever something repeats itself, eventually it sickens you and then you become indifferent towards it. And all of a sudden you realize, as you experience the same thing over and over and over and over again, there is less thing to worship, less longing. In fact, you want the thing to not be around you as much. The magic disappears, and when the other person says, well, you want to like hold hands, you say, yuck. And all of a sudden this human being who was like this temple that you long to go inside and you worship, you know, what lives inside this person, all of a sudden it becomes like another piece of meat and you don't want to be around it. So I would say don't be in a rush to create obstacles, but that would be a foolish thing to say, because life just creates obstacles with or without our consent. Whether you worship the right thing or the wrong thing, I don't really think it's that important. But I think it would be much to your benefit to worship someone like Socrates than, I don't know, Snoop Dogg. You know, sure, they both make you poets, they both make you very creative, but the outcome of worshipping someone like Snoop Dogg versus Socrates is vastly different. You know the story of Jonestown, right? That there's a group of people who love this man and they do anything that this man asks them. At a certain point, you know, he tells them drink this liquid and they do, and they all die. I suppose if my son was involved in such a cult, in such a group, As a father, I'll be very conflicted. Conflicted in the sense that someone has entered my son's life, and my son's life was going nowhere. He reads now, he worships now. He works without pay, the desire to be paid. His soul is involved in everything that he does, and it's a beautiful thing. That's something I've always longed for, something I experienced with Hussein for a decade or so. But as a practical man, I would also worry that eventually he's going to see flaws. Eventually he's going to see contaminants in the group, in this person. And what if he comes to see them at the age of 35, 45, 50? What does he have at the age of 50? Nothing. Andrea, a friend of hers and mine, he moved from Italy to this particular place, Grass Valley. Someone told him something. He was inspired by the fourth grade school or Gurdjieffian ideas. And he was there for 18 years. 18 years. He left at the age of 18 and he exited this cold almost when he was 40. At the age of 40. No degrees. No money. Nothing. If you're really, really mature, very cunning, you should study and study really, really well the tiny little saying of Jesus. Give to God what belongs to God, give to Rome what belongs to Rome. You need to have two lives. And these two lives, lion and the lamb, in one sense, yes, they need to lay together. In another sense, they could never be intimate. Lion must always be a stranger to the lamb, and the lamb must always be a stranger to the lion. What you do in the world of God, or you can call it your creative world, it's you lock yourself in your study and you read and you write. And when your companion asks, what did you write? What were you doing in there? Say, oh, nothing, I was just taking a nap. If you were to tell him about your writings, about your readings, what is he going to understand? What sort of questions is he going to ask? Does he even have the capacity to understand if you were to be truthful with him? And the answer is no. He would have some assumptions, probably the wrong assumptions. Then it would end up in this huge disagreement, maybe a conflict. He's sleeping on the sofa and you sleeping in your car. It's no way to live life. But if you have found a world of God, if you have found a world in which you can be enormously creative, if it nourishes and elates you in some way, if you haven't found it, then no worries. But if you have found it, you should go visit the world of God, whatever that may mean for you, and make sure that the world of Caesar doesn't know anything about it. And when you're in the world of Caesar, behave in ways that Caesar likes. You should always tell God what you do in the world of Caesar, because God was once in Rome before he moved into the desert, before he became a monk, before he realized that Rome has nothing to offer him. The Buddha was once Siddhartha, filled with desires, parents, money, power, marriage, children, religion. He had all of those things. So the Buddha understands what it means to be a Siddhartha, but Siddhartha can never understand what it means to be the Buddha. Caesar is always going to create obstacles for the world of God. And the world of God is always going to create obstacles in the world of Caesar. Always. And you have to be profoundly cooked. You know when to keep your mouth shut. You know how much to reveal, how much to expose, and how much to keep hidden. There is this great story that comes from the Sufi tradition about this kid who goes to this teacher and says, I'm here to know the truth. And the teacher says, okay, fine. Take this pot to my student's house who's sick. just don't open the lid. It's okay. So this new kid who wants to be a disciple takes this pot and becomes curious. What's inside this pot? I feel something. I hear some noise. But there was a commandment given to him by the teacher: don't open the lid. But curiosity, the world of Caesar. As Martin Luther would say, the whore of Athens. This desire to want to know everything. At some point, the kid can no longer contain himself, opens the lid, and this mouse jumps out. And he goes back to the teacher kind of ashamedly, and the teacher says, "Why are you back? Did you give him the pot?" "I'm sorry, I became curious, I opened the lid and the mouse jumped out. So, can I go again?" And the teacher looks at him and says, "If you can't handle such a simple thing, I'm just taking this pot from point A to point B, how can I trust you with giving you the truth?"